But when you are given 10 minutes by Dr. Rose Goge, you don't think the presentation is going to work very well. But the most important thing is I can start off by actually talking about the subject matter. For me, it's an honor to talk about this subject matter. First, because I'll tell you where it has come from. But second, because it is organized along the sidelines of the African Development Bank annual meetings, which we are hosting. I do believe that it's an honor. But the most important thing is to look at that topical area and look at even the policy paradigm and look at itself in terms of what are the implications of that. I think everybody comes to the conclusion that why Africa lags behind is because of its own scores in terms of human capital. But we can tie that to several conclusions in terms of studies done, and most studies produce a lot of indications, but most of the time, we also even come up with policy prescription. So in a sense, we would like to say, and where do we get from here? Today's knowledge event provides us with an opportunity to reflect among, let me mention 3 areas. First is the experience on human capital development in harnessing demographic dividends in Africa. I still recall a volume that we co-authored some years back, and we talked about the African lions. So we focused on 6 countries in Africa. Kenya was one of them. It's a book that was edited by Fintap, and I remember the other authors. But we asked ourselves, these are countries in Africa that have the potential. That's why we are calling them lions. But why is it that they are not unleashing this potential? So it's another area that we need to look at. The second one is to propose concrete modalities and approaches on effective circular movement of skilled labor across nations and diaspora participation. And third, we want to see how we can share experiences on how Africa can enhance resource mobilization through remittances. Anyway, having said that, I would like to welcome you to actively participate in this. But before I review, let me say a few words about this subject matter, because it has a bearing from where I've come from. That's why we have some of the presenters have been my successor. Victor Murinde has joined and is reading the ARC. That's where I was. And I think most of this work was covered, especially human capital development. And we actually included 7 Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation countries. But more importantly, it was actually including the think tanks in those countries so that we provide a platform for policy influence in those areas. Kipra will provide examples. But let me start, where do I come from in this topical area? I still recall in 2021, when everybody was desperate about persistent shocks that had really buffeted African economies, persistent negative shocks that actually created a permanent effect. Then the whole issue is what will drive economic recovery in Africa? That question was asked to me by so many people, and that's why I decided that maybe we'll start working on those areas. I gave 4 answers. And the first area I focused on was human capital development. And in human capital development, I actually decided the best thing is let's be more prescriptive. We want to see what is happening to our education sector. What is happening to our health sector, and more so health infrastructure that had been tested in 2019, 2020, in 2020, by COVID-19, the health infrastructure. And the third one is also to look at why do we neglect labor market when we are talking about human capital? The labor market itself is very, very important conduit in terms of what expertise is all about in the labor market and the functioning of the labor market. And fourth, how do we connect nutrition outcomes? I told myself that whichever way you start, and you are looking at human capital, you have to connect the dots in those 4 areas. And that's why I thought they were very, very important. I think people from ARC, Kipra, and even IDS in Kenya are able to talk about those subject matter very well. Because they were involved in this, I made sure that we connect the networks. I do believe it becomes important, but let me mention 2 points that are very, very important. One of them, why we find our own developing economies in Africa lagging behind, is the quality of institutions and leadership in those institutions. And we do believe that if you don't have a human capital expertise, we are going to lag behind. In fact, I was relating that to the World Bank has African Development, World Bank report 2024 has a theme on why middle-income countries stagnate. And you'll find some of the traces of the points that we are going to be talking about. And we do believe that this is something that we really need to talk about. The second thing I offered to argue and even show why things are going to take so long for us to recover is actually markets. What drives markets? Markets are the anchor through which production and productivity increases. This distribution of economic rents takes place in the marketplace. It creates the momentum for growth. But the moment markets collapse, the moment institutions that are supposed to protect, regulate, and drive markets collapse, then obviously markets collapse. And I've given examples in Kenya. Most of my friends in Kenya and other regions have given examples. The third one is actually domestic resource mobilization. Most of the African countries cannot finance development. And you cannot have that fiscal space that you desire, and you end up in debt. But the most important thing is that domestic resource mobilization is a whole family of instruments. Tax instruments are how you can optimize them. How you can actually even come up with instruments that crowd in private sector, because crowding out has become more prevalent. And how you can utilize domestic resources to the benefit of optimizing growth. And finally, I actually talked about how you can actually use the digital evolution to coordinate all those factors. And that is the way things should work. I remember in 2017, with the IMF, the IMF published a book on digitization and digitization and the design of public finance. What it shows is that you can actually use the digital evolution to actually coordinate most of the aspects that we do efficiently. For example, we started in Kenya in 2007 with M-Pesa. It actually became the retail electronic payment system, and you can use it for payments across. To date, we have seen countries like India, they can actually even use the payment system and even the digital space to actually provide services, like we are doing in eCitizens, but we have not managed to cover even close all the divide. And so it means that the fourth industrial revolution is very, very important for us, but more so coordinating our policies is going to be very, very important. So in a sense, what we have in front of us is a topical issue that we can actually raise specific questions. You can also raise specific answers from your own specific country that you come from and experiences. But we are going to listen to those people who are the gurus in this area. I just wanted to show my small contribution to this area, where we have covered most of these areas, but I do believe they are very well connected. But they are also the answer to where we can talk about momentum for growth and economic recovery after layers and layers of negative shocks. We are trying to unwind them, but we are not going to manage to unwind and create a momentum for growth unless we focus on where are the pain points and how can we ignite policy to resolve these issues. I'll stop there as an introduction, but let me say welcome to Nairobi. I forgot to say that, but because everybody is already there, I forgot to say that welcome to Nairobi, but being the host of the African Development Bank annual meeting, let me say welcome to Nairobi, and I'm sure we are going to have a very exciting discussion, but more so, especially for the researchers, we have a lot to take forward. For policymakers, we have a lot to learn and maybe try to implement. We know that this can work very well. So thank you very much and good afternoon.
Yeah, thanks very much, Professor Ndungu. for reminding us that we will not reap demographic dividends if we don't know what is going on with our health, with education, labor market, as well as looking at aspects to do with the quality of institutions, how our markets are working, and on top of all that, technology and resource mobilization. So as you've heard from Professor, we have another professor who is going to come here and tell us really what is it that African Economic Research Consortium has been doing as far as human capital development is concerned. Our CS was alluding to a project that Kipra was involved in, ARC and other think tanks in the region, and we'll get a snapshot of exactly what was coming from that study. So I want to bring in Professor Victor Murinde, who is the Executive Director of African Economic Research Consortium. Previously, he was the ARC's professor in global finance at SOAS University of London, professor of development finance at the University of Birmingham, and the founding director of the Africa Development Institute of the African Development Bank. He has contributed over 120 research papers to the economics literature, mainly in areas of banking and finance, and he's a fellow of the Econometric Society, a fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences, and also a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. So, karibu. Tumpigie makofi. Pingia.
So, thank you very much, Rose. All protocols observed. Let me first thank the Cabinet Secretary of the Government of Kenya for inviting me to this session, and also thank the African Development Bank that co-hosts of this meeting. In fact, I should say that the coverage by the moderator, Dr. Rose Ngugi, and the outline by the Cabinet Secretary has covered quite a lot of what motivates this scene. And so I would not like to bore you with a lot of repetition on this, but they have covered quite a lot of ground in this particular area. So the point here is that in the spirit of this year's FDB annual meetings, what I'd like to do is just briefly highlight the centrality of human capital development. And I just tease out the two important areas of democratic dividend and skilled labor. And as the moderator pointed out, I'll be drawing on the work that has been done by the African Economic Research Consortium together with the many other think tanks, including KIPRA, and also inspired by many leading researchers within the network. Now, a particular point, yes. The particular point here is actually to understand what we mean by the democratic dividend. Am I going in the right direction? No. Okay. Okay. Oh. I think I need... Okay, I need some support here. Okay. So, now, the point to be made here is to understand the democratic dividend, which may arise from the shifts in population age structure. And it comes with two possibilities, of course. The good story is that this dividend, or an increase in the youth population as a percentage of the total population, may provide tremendous opportunities for expanding growth, for expanding prosperity. That's the good story of this democratic dividend. But it may as well be the case that if we fail to invest in education, in health, in nutrition, labor markets, and social protection, as the Cabinet Secretary indicated, then of course there will be a damage to the potential for economic prosperity. This is what we know. The important question, though, is what critical factors do we need to take into account for being able to reap the benefits of the democratic dividend? I know that the Cabinet Secretary covered a number of factors, but just to outline them: the decline in fertility rates, improvements in health care, improvement in educational skills. But to add this is the important factor that was mentioned, the developments in technology and harnessing technology, the diffusion of technology to be able to reap the benefits of the democratic dividend, in particular, technology through the private sector. I just want to take an excursion and share what we know in terms of balancing human capital and preparing the way toward skill development. In fact, the work at the ERC has taken as a background the report from the UNDP and Human Development Report 2024 that shows that basically for the African region, there is a very low percentage of the lowest of the world population in terms of human skill development. But in fact, using the global data of Baron Lee, we find that the importance of education is very much redeemed. And this goes to work by one of our colleagues in the ARC, Abikadir, and goes to some of the recent evidence in terms of when this goes wrong, how does it affect growth? And how does it actually result into volatility of growth? That is an expected component in growth. And also to try to bring in the fact that during the recent COVID lockdown and challenges, there was instrumental effects because of the education being shrink from the inability to take up school attendance to the full. And these effects have affected, of course, the growth in human capital and, of course, the development of skills. In fact, a number of issues are also highlighted in terms of the evidence we have on Africa. For example, the challenges that many countries are facing, which actually resulted into last year's African Human Capital Heads of State in July, that actually showed the problems of access to schooling, the issue of the quality of education in terms of the high pupil-to-teacher ratios, and this actually has possibly been stagnant for quite some time. The issue of quality of education that I will be returning to in a moment. The issue on the first session today was about the school feeding programs, especially in Kenya, and also the support that you can get by investment in infrastructure. It's at this juncture that I would like to draw some of the work that's been carried out within the African Economic Research Consortium, in particular the work by Lant Pritchett, Jerry Berman, Jamano Mwabu from the University of Nairobi, and Stephen Dacon. This is just highlighting the leading authors, but the authors are actually drawn from the whole spread of the African continent, from the universities that were participating. And just to highlight some of this work, and the Cabinet Secretary mentioned this because he convened these studies when he was Executive Director of the African Economic Research Consortium at the position that he held before joining government. These studies were fundamental because they were able to go granular look at important case studies, in particular in Benin, Burkina Faso, Ethiopia, Kenya, Madagascar, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa, and Zambia. And you can see there are sharp differences across those countries. These sharp differences also, however, have a generality that cuts across them in spite of the differences. And the generality here is that COVID-19 had serious impacts in terms of the actual building of human capital and the diffusion of skills across different age brackets. But also that the themes covered include, for example, challenges around gender, food insecurity and how this impacts on poverty, and the reverse causality from poverty to food insecurity, the social protection, school attendance and attainment, especially drawing on case studies from Madagascar and Kenya, and issues to do with how skills can be tailor-made using, for example, the TVET educational programs. But a very important lesson from these case studies was one big conclusion about the need for a paradigm shift toward skills. Consistently across all these case studies, it is demonstrated there is an increase in spending on schooling. Why this is important is that for the last 10 years, when we try to measure empirically human capital as researchers, some of the indicators we use include spending on schooling, spending on education at various levels of education. But these studies have uncovered something new. It is said that this indicator, this proxy, this surrogate is inappropriate because what it shows is the expenditure by governments in spending. But what we should be trying to capture is the quality in learning. Okay. So there should be a paradigm shift that emphasis not on spending per se, but on whether this spending is resulting into investing in learning, investing in skilling. This is the most important conclusion from all these case studies in terms of shifting the paradigm by governments and the private sector in intervening in building human capital and skills. So I will end, Madam Moderator, on just highlighting some four key points. The first one is to create space for leveraging the private sector in funding, in building, in funding for skill development, especially as it leads to more towards employment and entrepreneurship. The second is the role of MDBs, including the African Development Bank, in terms of how they could be able to leverage and have regional programs that may be able not only support human capital development and skill development, but the diffusion of these skills across countries and across companies. And the third, food for thought is invest in learning or human capital, which is the main conclusion of this study, as opposed to actually looking at the expenditure items on this. And finally, is the investing and leveraging on technology for skill development and employment, to do with especially the youth and women, and that of course links into the democratic dividend story that we've been telling. And the evidence uncovered here that financial technology, the fintech, is significantly associated with a higher likelihood of self-employment. And that is the beautiful story that we'd like to go to. So this possibly provokes your thinking in terms of the next session of this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Professor Murinde, for that stimulating discussion. You reminded us that it's not just the aspect of spending in schooling, but also investing in learning. We now move on to a panel session. And the first person I welcome in my panel is Professor Murinde, Executive Director, African Economics Research Consortium. I also want to welcome Dr. Martha Piri, Director, Human Capital, Youth and Skills Development, Africa Development Bank. I also want to welcome Dr. Kwame Owino, CEO, Institute of Economic Affairs. Mr. William Asiko, the Vice President, Africa Rockefeller Foundation. Karibu. Yeah, so thank you very much, all of you, for agreeing to be part of this panel. And we are going to have discussions just to elaborate and also to shed more light on the issues that have just been discussed by the two presenters. And one of the things that I want to ask the panelists as they introduce themselves is to shed some light on what has been their experience in the space of human capital development that is geared towards harnessing demographic dividend for Africa. And probably I could start from Martha.
Thank you, Chairman, Madam Moderator. So it's a pleasure to be here and to be, engaged in this conversation. My name is Martha Piri. I'm Director for Human Capital, Youth and Skills Development at the African Development Bank. But I'm also Acting Director for Gender, Women, and Civil Society. And so this conversation couldn't have come at a more opportune time. If you're looking at where we are at now as a continent, this year is the year of education. And last year was the year of regional integration. And therefore, when you look at these two themes, you find that human capital is at the very center of socioeconomic transformation for Africa. At the African Development Bank, we have just approved 10-year strategy for the bank, 2024 to 2033. And at the center of that strategy is the recognition that a healthy, productive, and innovative workforce will be the one that will drive Africa's transformation, will be the one that will produce enough food for food security, will be the one that will drive the power plants, will be the one that will drive the transport connectivity, industrialization for value addition, of course, improve care services, health, education, and the rest of them. And so we take a comprehensive approach. Some of the aspects that His Excellency the Cabinet Secretary alluded to. We have nutrition, we look at it from a multi-sectoral approach. That is not just about agriculture, but it's also what we do in health, what we do in education, what we do in social protection. So we have to integrate a nutrition smart dimension in all projects that we do. Secondly, we want to make sure, and within this respect, we are partnering with the Aliko Dangote Foundation and the Big Win Philanthropy. You can see that private sector foundations recognize that it's in the interest of private sector as well to have a healthy, productive, and innovative workforce. Secondly, we are approaching it from having affordable healthcare to all, making sure that Africans have access to affordable healthcare. Learning from COVID-19, we can't do otherwise but to make sure that happens. So we have a strategy for quality health infrastructure, and we have $3 billion programmed for up to 2030, where we are supporting primary health facilities for last mile connectivity, making sure, of course, that we have secondary and tertiary care, but also diagnostic infrastructure. You will recall that we didn't even have enough diagnostic services during COVID-19. And not only that, we are also supporting digital health so that we can provide innovative solutions, leapfrog access to health care for Africans, and of course, health insurance as well. Thirdly, we support skills for employability and productivity in Africa. We look at it from the perspective of saying, okay, look, what is it that the priority value chains that many governments are focusing on need in terms of skills? So we take a value chain approach to developing training programs for youth so that they can be, they can have access to STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, but also technical and vocational and education training. So within the agriculture sector, making sure that we are, supporting in that respect. And we have provided $600 million over the past 2 years supporting African countries. And I think one thing that perhaps, moderator, you allow me to say is the fact that we are acknowledging where we are at in terms of entrepreneurship. Again, looking at the fact that, not every youth that goes into the labor market will find jobs. So what do? We want to make sure that we harness entrepreneurship in a big way and making sure that we de-risk youth participation in investments across the value chains. And within that, of course, lastly, before I move on, moderator, just give me 1 minute to highlight this thing, that, as we build skills for young people, it has become apparent that we can't run away from the climate impact. We grow to this year, and then it takes just one flood to erode all the gains. We grow, and then it takes just one drought to erode all the grains. So we have no choice but to make sure that we build the necessary skills that are climate smart, but also green skills. So job creation, healthcare, skills, as well as nutrition are a big part of what we do in the human capital development. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you very much for re-emphasizing the aspect of partnership and also the aspect of technology as well as the youth. So I want to bring in Mr. William as a partner in development process, just to tell us also what he's doing.
Thank you, Rose. Good afternoon, everyone. And let me say how much of a pleasure it is to have been included in this panel. I thank you, Honorable CS, for inviting me to this panel. Let me also say thank you through you, Dr. Martha, to the AfDB for hosting this in my home country, Kenya. I've attended many annual meetings over the last 10 years in African capitals and around the world. But I have never attended one in my home country. So this is of great significance to me. So let me just say that the Rockefeller Foundation has been in human capital development for a long time. It's almost part of our DNA, and our philosophy around human capital development has always been to look at the sectors that are perhaps a little bit ignored and then focus on those. And I won't take too much time to describe them, but I want to describe one that was particularly significant. It was a global program, but was particularly significant here in Africa, which we call the Rocky Dogs program. It was called the Rocky Dogs program because it focused on PhDs, and at that time it was PhDs around economics and agriculture, because we felt those were two areas. This was in the 60s and 70s, up to the mid-80s, that this program was running. It focused on PhDs, and today, we have about 400 alumni members of the Rocky Dogs program. Many of them are quite well known to you here. One of the Rocky Dogs that he has said many times publicly is the president of the African Development Bank, Dr. Kina Dishina. Another one is our good cabinet secretary here. He was also a Rocky Dog. And a number of others. There are many others that I could mention. Dr. Agnes Kalibata, who is right now today the president of the AGRA, is also a alumni member. So the idea behind the Rocky Dogs program was to look at sectors that perhaps we needed advanced degrees in order to move forward. And it really does make me proud to go around in African capitals when I'm there on work. I was in Lilongwe the other day, and I met somebody who told me he was a Rocky Dog. I've gone to Nigeria, I've met many Rocky Dogs, and it really is. And many of them are leaders in their institutions. So that's the first thing. The second is that on top of just focusing on human capacity development alone, we also look at how is it that you're going to deploy this capacity. So again, part of the things that we have done is to support institutions where this human capacity could make a difference. And you may not know that the Rockefeller Foundation supported AERC, it supported the IEA, the Rockefeller Foundation helped to establish AGRA. All of these have later on been run, and many others across the continent. And so look at areas where there are gaps, and then build capacity in those areas, and then develop platforms where that capacity can be deployed. And so that is legacy. What are we doing today? I think that where we are now, and before I say that, let me just tell you a very short 30-second story. Earlier this year, I was at the World Economic Forum, and a global CEO of a company that employs 250,000 people worldwide was having a fireside chat. And he was asked, what keeps you awake at night? What are the things you worry about? And he mentioned, some of the obvious things, climate change and how, his company and others would decarbonize fast enough to meet global commitments. He talked about climate change. He talked about artificial intelligence and how that is going to affect the workplace. COVID-19 recovery. Those things were all on his mind. But one thing that stood out for me as an African, he said a big challenge that every CEO should be thinking about today is the coming global competition for talent. So here's a CEO who leads an organization of 250,000 saying that his problem and the problem of many like him is going to be a shortage of talent. And the question I asked myself is, are Africans going to be in that competition? Are we going to be part of those who are competing to get those slots where they see is going to be a shortage? And this really needs to be what we need to discuss today. Because how do we know? How do we know what jobs, what skills these companies are going to require? And we have an idea. Today, just look at the megatrends that are driving global economic activity. Climate change, artificial intelligence, the digital revolution. And one that is close here to us today is global financial architecture and how we can build the skills for the future in these areas. What are we doing about it? So one of the areas the Rockefeller Foundation's been focused on is how we build a carbon market in Africa that is fit for the world. If you recall, our own President Ruto said at the African Union Summit this year that he wants carbon markets to be Kenya's leading foreign exchange earner by 2030. That is absolutely possible. Do we have the talent to make sure that is done by Africans for Africans? Because we know this is a big opportunity that's coming ahead of us. Those are the questions we need to ask ourselves. Can we develop the skills for the future that we know is coming? We know the issues. We know climate change is a big issue. We know AI is a big issue. We know carbon markets are going to have a strong demand on employment, and there's going to be a lot of talent. And we want to build these carbon markets on the continent and build them with Africans, and we want the carbon markets to be led by Africans and for Africans. Let me stop there, Dr. Rose, and thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Now that we are talking about capacity building, I know there are very many of us who have gone through ARC. Let me bring in Professor Murinde to tell us what they are doing.
Yeah, thank you, Rose, and very much for giving me another opportunity. I think I'll speak more or less from the heart. I'll tell you the experiences from the perspective of the African Economic Research Consortium. But maybe I don't need to drive the story hard. Looking around the room, I can see some familiar faces who indeed are affiliated to the African Economic Research Consortium, who have actually gone through the African Economic Research Consortium. And so I just want to break down the story possibly to three main elements. And first of all, I acknowledge, by the way, my colleague here, yes, Rockefeller, provided the catalytic financing element for the African Economic Research Consortium in 1988, many years ago, and that has been really tremendous catalytic. In terms of the experiences of capacity building, I just want to focus on three main areas where the ERC has really been moving mountains in terms of being able to serve as the premier capacity building institution in the area of economics, for the economics profession across the continent for the last almost 40 years. And the first element has been in terms of research, high quality research. In other words, providing an opportunity to all researchers in Africa, whether based at universities, whether based at central banks, or based actually in the government departments, and some based in the private sector, to be able to investigate research issues, burning research issues of African dimension. For example, exposure to global shocks, how to price climate bonds. All those issues, when they come up from the demand side, from the policymaker, and from the practitioner, they are then investigated within the African Economic Research Consortium through the channels of thematic research, groups A to E, or through collaborative research, where you get the best around the world, and then you focus on an issue, you investigate it, you get country case studies, you then produce real high quality scientific work in a period of, say, 3 years. So this is building the capacity of Africans to be able to lead the research on the problems confronting the African continent. And I think that it has no parallel. I possibly think in that case, the ERC is similar to the National Bureau of Economic Research, NBR, in North America, in Canada and US. Also comparable to the CPR, which is the Center for Policy Economic Research in Europe. And I happened to come to the African Economic Research Consortium when I've been participating in these other two global bodies of the world. And that gives me really a sense of appreciating how much the ERC has achieved. And the previous predecessors that have been in the work, including Professor Njuguna Ndungu, who has served at all levels of the African Economic Research Consortium in research. So this research, the ability for economists within Africa to research their own issues should not be taken for granted, because they are able to interface and address the demand side of the research. And I think that will expand as we go on. The second dimension is the actual training. Okay. This is the training in new research methodologies, but specifically ensuring a step change in the qualifications of people employed across government departments, across central banks, and of course university departments, by offering a collaborative master's degree program in economics, a collaborative master's degree program in applied economics with respect to agriculture, and of course also offering the collaborative PhD program, the CPP. And these elements ensure that the great number, since 1988, the number have increased more than 50% of graduates that are actually coming from these programs and going straight into government departments. That is why if you work in any central bank in Africa or work in any Ministry of Finance in Africa, you will definitely find there a graduate or a former graduate of the ARC, and that you can actually test. So this has been consistent on providing the capacity in areas and also reaching across, even providing inclusive element of reaching those countries, whether they are Francophone or Lusophone or Anglophone. The third element is to be able to take the high quality research output and translate it into policy and practice. We call that research uptake. And that research uptake has increased mainly by providing the senior policy seminar, to which I guess many of you here have been invited and participated, interacting with the policymakers. That is the demand side of research. The researchers, where the supply side provide the research, the demand side. And then the senior policy seminar includes a third body in a research ecosystem, which is the think tanks. Think tanks are knowledge intermediaries. They intermediate between the research being so, and then translate it into policy frameworks that are then articulated in a government blue paper that it takes for being able to ratify new policy changes. And that has worked tremendously. These three elements are really what was the experience of the ERC. But we are not stopping there. I think we're ambitious. We're going to have enlarged the vision, enhance the highest quality of work, and the work starting immediately now is to be able to have to step change triple times in terms of the amount of PhDs produced on the African continent, where there is a big deficit, and have at least training of 100 new PhDs every year. That's enrolling 100 PhDs in a year, of which 70% will be women. Okay, 30% men, 30% women. That would be a real critical change. And that program lasting over the next 10 years. Step change. So, Madam Moderator, let me stop here.
Thank you very much. I like that you have brought in the aspect of ecosystems and therefore think tanks. And I can now go to Kwame.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks a lot for this opportunity to sit here and to give my views. I'm going to make 3 points, and I've benefited a lot from what I think the introduction that we had, and obviously the analysis that was given to us from ARC. So I'll make 3 points. One is a question of fact, the other 2 are analytical conclusions that we at the Institute of Economic Affairs have reached. So the first is that there are many ways of ensuring human capital development. But the most basic one that we at the Institute of Economic Affairs have observed is basically in public education, or at least education driven by the resources that government allows or invests. If you look at Kenya's case, so here I'm trying to connect it to the demographic question. If you look at Kenya's case, again, based on fairly good data that the National Bureau of Statistics has provided, we put together the numbers and it tells you that every single day, 11 million Kenyan children wake up and go to a public primary school. That's what the numbers suggest to us. And then another 5 or 6 million go to secondary school. Now, if you put together those numbers, that's 17 million, or let's say 16 million to be conservative. That's a larger population than Kenya had at independence. So here, I'm connecting this question to the demographic fact. So what that tells you on the whole is that that number of people and the progress that the country has made is a significant factor in how this country is going to look like a generation from now. So the possibility of harnessing that demographic dividend is available, and how it is harvested is the question. So that's the fact. So the first analytical thing that comes to us is this. Again, data from the household budget surveys that Government of Kenya publishes every so often tells you 2 things. One, that the higher the number of years of schooling, I'm advised, and I'm conscious about the fact that we've been all measuring years and not necessarily quality, but let's leave that for aside. The higher the number correlates, rather the years of schooling in Kenya correlate very highly with incomes. So that people who've completed 12 and more years have, all factors considered, the highest incomes in Kenya. So what that tells you again is if you're a planner sitting back here, you know that one of the imperatives for dedicating resources, policy, and research should be in how we get as many people as possible through this pipeline into the higher income people. Basically that. So that's still a possibility that exists and which the data empirically tells us is an imperative. So that's essential. Now, of course, as we heard earlier today, that simply measuring the number of people pushed through an education system, and remember in Kenya, obviously, the value of education to Kenyan households is self-evident. In addition to appropriating what government spends, many households supplement education at all levels, primary, high school, and even tertiary levels, with household incomes, limited as some of those incomes might be. So the demand side is almost a given. And because that's almost a given, there'll be great dependence on the extent to which the quality of education, and because this is a mass and scale thing, only government can actually meaningfully change that qualitative question that we heard about this morning. So that's the second imperative. And our final analytical point for this discussion today comes from the fact that in the end, you're connecting this human capital to markets and farms. Because while, I should have mentioned this point as I started, but while it is very, very clear that African countries, I'm reiterating what was told to us, but African countries have some of the lowest levels of education among countries globally, in terms of education attainment globally, that is very, very closely connected, correlates, almost causative with the welfare and development outcomes that we've seen. So that's part of what needs to be unlocked. But we know that in the end, people work in farms or they work in households, and the incomes that they're able to appropriate is itself connected to their productivity, which comes through education, or most of it through this and other forms of human capital development. It means that the competitiveness of African farms, and Kenyan farms in particular, will come from the success that goes in from the demand side, which is a given, the supply, and the knocking of that quality together with that demand is what will determine the successes of Kenya's private sector, farms, and incomes that households are able to appropriate, in turn affect savings, and obviously the provision of public goods that government needs to provide. So in connecting one fact to those analytical things, we at the Institute of Economic Affairs are convinced that the prospects for demographic dividend exists because the numbers are there. The demand side for education, in our view, is a given for the next generation, perhaps more. I think what we need to fix is that quality question, but also to ensure that human capital is properly developed. Because if you have 16 million people at the most basic levels, it's telling you that it's definitely, if you lift even by 10 percentage points or 20 percentage points, the productivity of each and every one of them, one, the productivity will be up, and then plus the big number of people, that will definitely be consequential for Kenya's economy and for its development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's a lot that is coming from our panelists, and all pointing out to the fact that as we do human capital development, one of the things that we need is actually to mobilize resources. But at the same time, it's turning out that there is quite a lot of effort happening for human capital development, but it looks like maybe not all countries are at the same level as far as human capital is concerned. And probably we need to look at how we can share the available skills to enhance our development. To the panelists, how then, what is the best formula that we can take in terms of sharing even the human capital that we have developed are such that we can actually even develop more, bring in probably the diaspora, which sometimes is outside there and it can help us, and as well as maybe bring in the diaspora remittances to the country. Can I start with Martha again?
Okay. No, Chair, so thank you. I think, first of all, what we learned during COVID-19 was how we benefited from what we experienced during Ebola. So during Ebola, it taught us that we should invest in standards and skills of health personnel that are able to manage pandemics like Ebola. Okay, and we were closed out, and we didn't have access to some of the international expertise that we often do, but we were able to exchange, information as well as the few, training personnel that were there that knew how to address the issue of pandemics. So what is key is that we have to invest in certification and qualifications, as well as standards that are cross-border appreciated. So governments should be able to appreciate that, the standards from, someone trained in Kenya, for instance, we can easily use that person in Uganda, in Malawi, and elsewhere. And then we need to take advantage of the digital, revolution. With the current digital innovation, you don't have to be in Kenya to work in Kenya. You can be in Cote d'Ivoire, working in Kenya throughout the year. And so it gives us an opportunity to leverage digital in order to provide that cross-border, exchange of personnel. And I think it's also important to recognize that we need to scale up. We just need to scale up, upskilling, reskilling, because with the fourth industrial revolution, skills become irrelevant, within a short period of time. So we have to make sure that we continue investing in skilling, upskilling, and reskilling domestically, but also making sure that we are responding to cross-border needs as well, including, of course, diaspora.
Thank you very much, Martha. And I want to bring in Victor, because most of the those who have benefited from ARC, we are spread everywhere. But how do we utilize the same effectively?
Yeah, thank you, Rose. And true, the ERC has a tested and reliable framework for ensuring the security of skills across the African continent. For example, in terms of research, there is a high degree of research collaboration across researchers in Kenya working with researchers from Nigeria or Ghana or Burkina Faso in trying to address problems when these problems are regional across the continent. And there is also the practice of bringing in a lot of top economists from the diaspora who work either as resource persons, but also work as collaborators during the collaborative program. And that ensures that the skills are actually passed on. The skills, especially involving new methodologies or new data handling. Now with the artificial intelligence and machine learning, it means that they have to have undertaken training in data analysis to be able to generate the codes that are used to generate new data that can be used for analysis. So those skills are passed on through collaboration and through that kind of circular flow of skills across. But there is also in training, the training of trainers, whereby an individual, from Makerere University Department of Economics, can attend the training here and then go back to the department and then be able to actually use that training both for the colleagues as well as for the students. I think that is the mode that has been put to the test, has been circulated, and of course, thank you to all those supporters of the ERC out there, including FCDO, IDRC, and many other organizations that make that possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I want to bring in Kwame just to tell us whether you feel that we are utilizing all the skills that we have at the moment.
Okay. So let me say this. You know, if you talk about the skills about high-level PhD training, you know that the World Bank released a report last year on migration. And one of the things it tells you is that the higher the skill levels, the more likely that somebody will migrate. And therefore, what that suggests is that for ARC trained or economists with high value, they are more likely to actually find opportunities to go out, to go out there. And that's a good thing, because that means that they work both within the continent and in other places in which they add value. Then connecting that to the question of remittances, the higher the skill levels, obviously, the more the remittances would be of value. So that, in my view, means that actually it's the right way to point to not just raising the quality of the human capital, whether they stay at home or whether they have the opportunity to work regionally or in global spaces. I think it's still a net gain for any society and for the individual who's invested in their own human capital. Thank you.
Thank you very much. William, these 400 that you've trained, where are they?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question. And, you know, we are working on, you know, having an event and hosting them. And I will ask for your help in doing that because we want to host them here in Nairobi. But we find that they're everywhere, all right? What does give us a sense of pride is that the vast majority of them are here on the continent. Mm-hmm. But many of them are leading institutions abroad. Mm. And I just want to ride on something that Kwame said, which I think is really important. Look, I think that our capacity building efforts in Africa, or our human capital development in Africa, has been seen very much as a public good, as it should, and that is essentially right. But I think we can go a step further. We can look at our human capital development as part of a supply chain for talent for the world, as part of a supply chain for global talent. And the reason I say this is that today, if you go to hospitals and other medical institutions in Europe and North America, you know, you'll find a significant number of Africans who are trained right here on the continent, who are working there. And there is nothing wrong with that. I am fully supportive of Africans going to look for opportunities abroad. I think what is the tragedy is that we African taxpayers pay for their training. That is the tragedy. And I think that we need to look for a way, because we know that there is a demand for that talent. And you know, I've taken the medical space because that's the most obvious, but it happens in many other sectors as well. The fact is that if there is a demand for something, then those who have the demand for it should be prepared to pay for it. So how do we work with those countries that have a high demand for the talent we have here that is in excess? How do we work out a formula where they pay for that talent to be trained to the standards that they want and they set, so that these people can graduate and be absorbed either locally or in the places that are paying for that talent? I think that's an opportunity we can explore. I know it's coming from a very practical perspective, and, you know, sitting with all these PhDs, sometimes, you know, you can feel intimidated. But I think that from a very practical perspective, you know, that's an area that we can explore. And there are many others. But I'll stop there and, you know, allow us to continue the discussion.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I think I want to go almost finishing. I can see our time is running. And in finishing, as you give your parting shot, just remind us, since financial resources are core part of human capital development, which is the best option for us? Kwame has said that households are actually supplementing education. William has said he gives money. I think Victor has also said he's giving money. And Martha is also saying they have the 10-year plan. But how do we harness all these resources, and are they adequate at the moment? Victor, can we start with you?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very important question of harnessing all those resources. I think there is a need for a high degree of leveraging those resources. So whichever source of resources available, then leveraging from other compatible resources makes it possible to deliver the perfect or the necessary human capital development for either for a country or for a company or even for individuals. So leveraging, I would say, would be one. Now, in the context of other institutions, you have leveraging in the context of hybrid financing, for example, which makes it possible that you are combining different sources and making it making the acquisition of education or of skills quite possible.
Your parting shots.
Thank you. No, I think I'll just repeat what I said. Let's match existing skills with demand, wherever that demand is around the globe. I think we can go a long way in solving human capacity demographic dividend, reaping that demographic dividend by matching our supply with the demand that is outside of the continent.
Okay.
I think that my view is that we should let incentives for private sector to invest in more human capital development. Government resources should be dedicated on a measured basis, on the basis of what's the most cost-effective way to use limited resources which government has to achieve the greatest needs for society. And because government has that data, that can be calculated and would be used to guide government policy.
Okay, Martha.
20% of the youth joining the labor market find jobs in the formal sector. Some numbers put it at 30%. And only, if you look at the rest of them, either they are in the informal sector, earning very meager resources, or they are unemployed. There is an enormous potential to generate more revenue, additional revenue for our countries domestically. If we only focus on investing in small and medium enterprises for youth-led, youth-owned enterprises, but also for women enterprises, because that is the space where there is potential for growth and potential for scale and potential for revenue generation for our economies. And I think this is where the bank is doing its best in investing and leveraging private sector to come in by one, and I will finish there, three things. One, making sure that we are building the necessary skills for these young people and women to start, grow, and scale their businesses. Two, by de-risking their investments, making sure that we attract private sector to see them as bankable. So bringing in de-risking instruments. And three, of course, hand-holding them, making sure that you provide mentorship, incubation, acceleration, and aggregation. And we have seen changes happening. And I think that's one way of supporting human capital development when you build at that level. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We are almost out of time, but we have 8 minutes. I can open up for one burning question, just one or two, to the panelists. Yeah, I have one here, and yeah, only two. And just straight to the point.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I am from Isiolo. I represent northern people where they say it is a harsh land, it is a semi-arid land, where climate change is the case, where we are pastoralists. We are fighting over little resource that we are getting because of climate crisis. My organization, Going for Greater, have taken initiative of growing trees in my end. Isiolo, Marsabit, Moyale, Mandera, Garissa, Wajir. Like 2.5 trees to salvage my society and my community from this crisis we are facing of climate change by introducing a greener skill for youth. I am a CEO to that organization. Thank you, panel, for your discussion.
Thank you very much. A very good contribution. That lady. Just one there. Yeah.
All protocols observed. My name is Ivy Wamboy Mushoki. I am here in the capacity of Global Youth Parliament, but I am a climate advocate, one of the advisory panels to the CEO of Global Center on Adaptation. My question is with regards to the Rockefeller Foundation. I heard you talking about that you have trained a lot of young people, but there's like a lack of capacity for understanding the next demographic of young people. Where are we going to get their skills from? So I was sitting here and I'm thinking, what are the odds that we are actually now all in line with exactly what Africa and the young generation needs? So in my head, I'm trying to accelerate, how is it that we can create an acceleration program, especially for the young people, so that even within the devolved governments, especially here in Kenya, where we are a devolved government, counties and young people can be able to take up these opportunities with regards to their skills. So it's more of how do we get this accelerator program within the locally led adaptations program on the ground, and the young people can be able to benefit from this. And also their skills can also be data-based or be put on a data analyst so that everybody ends up getting and nobody misses. Because we have a capacity of young people that are mostly job-ridden. They have actually given up on hope, and it's really a big problem, especially here in Kenya. And suicide is becoming at a very high rate. And so my question is, how can we accelerate these young people to be able to get this locally skills so that they can get functions and more money to the enterprises? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have 4 minutes. I'll divide it across. If you want to jump in, I'm very sure that Martha will jump in, Kwame, Prof. Yes. Can I start with William?
All right, I'll just take 1 minute. Thank you, Rose. Look, I think, as I said earlier, climate change presents a big challenge for the globe. It presents a big challenge for Africa. But I think it also presents a big opportunity for us to reap the demographic dividend. I think we need to look at the kind of skills that are going to be required as we go forward. Some of them are obvious and some of them are not so obvious. And I feel the pain of those 2 questioners today who are saying that we have young people, we are fighting over limited resources, and what can we do to prevent these things using human capital development? And I think that is the challenge for us. How do we look at the skills that are required for the future? There is an area in climate called climate finance. We have very little capacity in that area, innovative finance. Prof has very few people helping him on that, and I know he does quite a lot on it. Innovative finance, how do we get people training in climate finance? There are other areas that could very well provide opportunities for these young people. So thank you for those questions. I think climate is an area we need to look at. Thank you, Rose.
Okay, Martha.
Thank you. I think we have to listen to young people and take their ideas into account and make sure that we give them an opportunity to start something. Of course, allow them to, be able to fail, but give them an opportunity to start again and go on. So we are doing that at the African Development Bank, making sure that we have a clear strategy on youth employment and entrepreneurship, and then mobilizing everybody, to invest in youth-led businesses at scale. not the meager, small IGA that we used to have. No, we have to invest in real businesses where the young people are able to start and grow and scale their businesses. But also, lastly, just to make sure that each investment that we make in each country, now what we're trying to do is to apply a youth lens, to say if we have a power project in Kenya, how can youth get integrated in that power project? To make sure that those with skills are able to be part of the project. So that's what we are doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've been given another 10 minutes so I can get more questions. We have one here and another one there. Yeah, so please. Yes. Who has the mic? Here.
My name is Kubada Feka. I'm the president of the Treasure Women Warriors in the Gambia. Build necessary skills for youth and women to scale their businesses. Do you really think there's political will for African countries to help particularly women scale their businesses? Because we have 7,000 women in the Gambia, and there have been so much money invested all through the years for capacity building for women and so many programs relating to women. But still, we're facing so many difficulties, access to finance, and also educating these women financial literacy. So my question, is there real political will to really help women scale their businesses and also formalize the informal sector these women are in? That's my question.
Thank you very much. We have another one there at that far corner. That one.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Francis. I'm from civil society. My question is, we Africans, we have been talking about this issue for a long time. It's now almost 60 years, and we are still just walking on the same path. We have a bank here called African Development Bank. If you see in Africa here, youth are languishing in poverty. Especially African, we are growing, we are just assuming the poverty in the African nations, because I've never seen where youth are benefiting from these meetings, because we have been talking these things for a long time. So at least we need a different, because we should not be on the same page always. We need to change our strategy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have one more here. Here. Is there any there? That side?
Yeah. That lady in black has been having her hand up.
Yes. We'll give to you.
Thank you very much. My name is Mahesh Kotacha. I'm one of the exports from Africa to United States. Idi Amin invited me to find another country. And Uganda should charge US for that. I agree, totally. My question, I'm a banker, so please forgive me. I'm not a rocket doc or any other doc, although my wife is. So my challenge to everyone is, why not harness technology to solve the human human development challenge? We have artificial intelligence which can do so much. I've heard that word mentioned only a few times. This is the biggest revolution taking place in technology worldwide. It is going to change. Many of the jobs we are training for here today will be gone. So we need to really harness technology. And I was talking to the cabinet secretary. He always finds something that I don't know, so he did, which was, why don't we have centers of excellence in technology and in management and in education? And perhaps we do, that people actually worldwide don't know about, but they should, right, if they are there. If they're not there, we should make them. India, Nehru started Indian Institutes of Technology and Indian Institutes of Management. They produce the best CEOs in the world today. You look at American businesses, one of the, I don't know if Google, there are lots of them run by IIT graduates and IIM graduates. And Africa has no reason to be behind that. Absolutely none.
Thank you very much. The last question is from that angle.
Yeah, that's me. Sorry.
Okay.
My name is Odera, and I'm actually with the African Development Bank. I'm an intern there. And I do have 2 questions, so you can either take one or the other or both. I think my first question pertains to fragility, because I think when we talk about fragility, we talk about it in the terms of like infrastructure development, but not so much in terms of education. And I'm also talking from the context of a Nigerian, right? Because most of the parts of Nigeria where you see under education of women specifically, or on like lack of education, is in parts of Nigeria that are actually very, very fragile. So now you're thinking in terms of being a parent, for example, wanting to send your female child to school, and you can't even do that because there's this looming fear that your daughter is going to be kidnapped or something of similar to that nature. So as we're thinking of education, how do we also think of addressing, fragility in countries like mine and neighboring countries that have to deal with these issues in depth? I think my second question also relates to what the person from civil society was saying, and relates also to what Mr. Asiko was saying. And it was addressed very briefly in Mr. Murinde's presentation, and that's in terms of brain drain, which I think we still haven't addressed. So people do finish from schools here, and educational attainment is really on the rise on the African continent. And people finish from schools and they are unable to get jobs. So at this point, I don't think that's necessarily an African-specific thing, because you do find complaints like this across social media in various countries, in China, the UK, etc. But in terms of Africa, we can't afford situations where big parts of our population, almost 60% of Africans are youths at this point, who are, unemployed or, again, like I said, undereducated. So again, how are we as a group or a group of nations working to address some of these issues? Because yes, I do agree that we benefit as a continent from the presence of like a strong diaspora. But if we, on the home soil or in home nations, are not necessarily benefiting from the high levels of education of our youth, then where exactly are we going with our levels of development? So these are my 2 questions.
Thank you very much. I think we are almost over with our 10 minutes. I think there are quite a number of issues on political will and skills for women businesses. There's also the aspect of whether we are stagnating as far as this debate is concerned. And also the skills we are developing in the context of the new technologies. I've heard us mentioning about machine learning, but is that all? Are we really developing centers of excellence? And then the aspect of security, fragility, and brain drain. Who wants to go first? Okay, Kwame, then
All right.
Victor. Yeah.
Okay, I'll say 2 things. The first is, I think we have to be conscious as Africans not to beat ourselves too much. To be honest, in 1963 when Kenya gained independence, I wasn't born, I was born in the 2nd decade of independence. Between then and now, there's substantial progress. I mean, Kenya's basic literacy rates are close to 80%. It was less than half of that 60 years ago. So it's important for us to say that yes, we expect more, and that's certain, but I think we need not understate what has been achieved, because that is the foundation upon which we build to get to the stars. So that's the first. The second question is about, I think, if you look at the World Development Report published by the World Bank for 2023, it actually shows that Africa has the lowest rates of migration globally, and sub-Saharan Africa in particular. So I have to be careful here that I don't create the wrong impression. Emigration is not yet Africa's problem. I think we have an undersupply of certain skills, and so our human development human capital development policy should be actually expanding supply. So for instance, a country like this trains 500 doctors or less every year against a population that grows at 2.5%, 2.8% per year of a base of 50 million. It is extremely small. No wonder if 400 doctors go on strike, for instance, the entire country shuts down. So a supply problem is here. We can prepare over the medium term to support, but the brain drain problem, in my view, is not acute yet. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Victor.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I just want to respond to just only pick two. The first is the lady from the Gambia. I couldn't catch the name. I think actually that's a very fundamental question of asking why African women entrepreneurs are not coming up and why the women businesses are not succeeding at the rate that would have been expected. My insight comes from randomized control trials we've done in Ghana, in Kenya, and in Burundi. The insight you get is that it's actually not about money. It's not about the availability of finance per se. That the availability of finance is secondary. The first is the skills. So the support that should be given to these women groups, women entrepreneurs, is the skills to distinguish whether a business is viable or not. Whether actually that business can actually run is not a photocopy of another business that has been seen being operating, and that the primary motive is just to ascertain that this business works. Then secondary, finance comes in. And this is kind of across all these countries. So this is the insight we get. It's not about money, but about the skills to be able to run a business. And the working in groups develop the skills to the cooperative. The second comment I want to make is the gentleman here. I agree with you absolutely. That it is high time Africa actually embarks on this, on the fintech revolution, especially the artificial intelligence and machine learning capabilities. I know that Ghana and Kenya have been running festivals for fintech. But my fundamental insight starts with a project that I started 3 years ago, which looks at the bilateral trade between India and the UK in the areas of fintech and fintech-enabled services. You know, basically, most of the softwares are done in India. They are actually registered, patented in the UK, and traded globally. Okay. And you see the cross-learning is immense. My interest, drawing from that 3 experience, and I have a festival in July in London, is that the African Union, the countries of the African Union, should embark on this ability of trading any software across the African countries. So the experience of trading between UK and India can actually be applicable within the African continent. And then we can make a leapfrog. But countries left on their own, I think it will be a long time before we can reach the end of the journey. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I think absolutely. You know, when you look at what the African Union and African governments are going, I think the intention is right. Because when you talk about, indeed, trade among ourselves, this is the least traded continent globally. And so with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, we are actually promoting job creation on the continent. And with value addition as well that we talked about, we are talking about not exporting jobs, because if you export primary products like we've been doing, we've been exporting jobs. And so when we're adding value here, we're actually creating jobs for our young people here. I think the political will, we are seeing some traction there. And the issue of women, Madam, you say, we were very, very pleased yesterday to meet Pauline. Pauline is a beekeeper in Kenya. And she started off 5 years ago with 0 farmers. She had no one. Right now, she's working with 10,000 farmers. She had 4 employees. Now she has 12 employees. She's able to manufacture bees for the supermarkets here. So essentially, you can see it may not be enough, but we are going towards somewhere. The MDB reform that is going on that the Cabinet Secretary talked about in his opening remarks is essentially contributing to the issue that he raised. We've been here 60 years. How come we're not making that much progress? Of course, we can see that it has not been enough. So part of what the governments are doing in advocating for MDB reforms is to make sure that Africa has access to these development resources that can be affordable in terms of helping development on the continent. But you also listened to what we are doing internally, making sure that we are strengthening domestic resource mobilization, strengthening efficiency of spending, strengthening innovation, and so on, to make sure that we have the resources to develop our country. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we can all appreciate that the panel has actually done justice to engaging us in this topic. So can we appreciate the panel? Yeah, thank you very much. And at this juncture, I know that there is quite a lot that we have gathered in terms of the approaches that we can do, in terms of considering aspects of climate change, in terms of gender approach to the things that we are doing, and also in aspects of technology. I want to welcome CS Professor Njuguna Ndung'u. We had agreed that he's going to give us a high-level policy implications of what we have talked about today. So karibu sana. And I can retire my panel. Yeah. Asante sana.
Well, we're just giving you live coverage of the 59th edition of the African Development Bank Group annual meeting, which is taking place here at Kenyatta International Convention Center. This afternoon, a very interesting and exciting conversation around the growth of human development in Africa, as well as climate financing, and some big numbers coming through from the speakers. So
audience are quite convergent with the ideas that we thought we should promote. And in fact, the next Norwich event is also around the same lines. One of the underlying factors, and I think this is very, very important for our own drive in terms of policy, is the market failure problem fails to develop the skills. And I think the reaction from the market is very, very important. Most of the time, and I heard there's somebody who raised the issue of labor markets, is because labor markets can in itself induce expertise downstream, because upstream where the market is functioning, then you can see that there is actually income levels. So in a sense, we have to also re-emphasize the role of markets. But why do markets fail? And this is where we started. There's the very important policy question is an institutional failure problem. How do we protect the institutions? In my life, I've always emphasized two functions for these institutions. I actually most of the time say the institutional DNA. The first thing is actually the institutions have to make sure that they promote the legal framework. Most of the time in the streets we talk about the rules of the game. Every game must have its own rules. And someone must uphold those rules. Rules must be protected. And the second one is that institutions must define appropriate incentives, or in general, what we call the reward system. And a combination of a legal framework that is upheld, sustained and protected, and appropriate incentives will encourage market to function. And that is why when markets fail, then everything else fails. I heard that somebody talking about jobs. Yeah, there are no jobs. There are jobs. It's only that that market where the jobs are generated is not visible. Somebody talked about the informal sector. The informal sector must be running away from something, and we need to discover that there is an incentive to bring them to formality. You cannot formalize the informal sector because you have to ask yourself, why are they informal? So these are policy questions, and we want to make sure that we uphold them. So I'm very happy that at least some of the issues that we wanted to bring out, in fact, what I was thinking is that when I started saying that we had a study, we produced and fought very hard for a study in 2018 on human capital development, where we combined education, health, labor markets, and nutrition. One of the things is to ask why labor markets becomes very, very important. And in general, all the markets. And that is why I wanted actually to make sure that at least the flavor of the issues to come, and this being the first knowledge events, some of those themes are going to be felt across as we continue. When I listened to Kwame talking about 16 million children, about 3/4 of that in primary education, and the rest in secondary school education and higher, you can imagine those people, those quality of students, those number of students are quite extremely frightening. You have to have a budget for them. But the next thing is, they are going to get skills. Are you ready? Is the market ready for those skills? So in a sense, we have to look at those factors that are coming up, practical examples that have been provided by the panelists, and I'm sure that is something to work through. I'm a product of capacity building myself, and Victor talked about it. And I have also raised or developed capacity in various forms in Kenya, and not only in Kenya, whichever country I go to, I find that most of the economists are always going to talk about the same language because we have met in one way or the other. The fourth panelist who had a conflicting meeting was Professor Mturi Nkove, who is also an ARC alumni. Again, you can tell that they are now reading Policy Drive from the ARC point of view, but what they are really trying to do is to enlarge and to make sure that institutions perform and function so that we can enlarge that space. We continue looking at that space. I'm very happy about the examples that were provided by William, by my dear sister here in terms of human capital development. Victor is going to be in that space building capacity for a long time. So is Kwame. By the way, Kwame did not even say he builds capacity, but he builds capacity and very much biased towards policy, which is actually very, very important. And together we are sure that we are going to get work done, including also Rose Goge in an institution that was formed by the government in the late 1990s. And it has spearheaded some of the policy definitions that were missing. Those are the policy questions and institutional issues that we raise, we continue to raise, and if we look at that space, we can actually improve on the space. I thank you very much for this first knowledge event. It was dedicated to the host country. Of course, it's because we have done a lot of heavy lifting to get to where we are here, but I'm sure there are subsequent ones, and the next one that follows is actually around the same themes. And let's be there so that out of this, we are going to have some policy questions that we can distill and try to move the frontier. Thank you very much and good afternoon.
So thanks very much. This is just the beginning of the sessions that have been lined up to discuss matters to do with human capital. And this was only a beginning, and I hope that you've gained something that you'll take up to the next session. So sit back and wait for the next session. That is just about to start, and I can see Janet there. Karibu. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's just to echo what Rosemary has said. We'd love to have you back for the next session. So please either remain behind or grab a snack and network and then find your way back for the session. We'd really like to have you join us for that. See you back very shortly. Thank you.
Well, that is the first session of the knowledge management that has just taken place at the Savo Ballroom here at the Kenyatta International Convention Center, and big numbers coming out of this critical meeting here, where if I'm allowed to take you through, you're talking about a continent that is bigger than the United States, China, India, Europe, all of these combined, and with a population of about 1.3 billion people receiving a mere $30 billion in terms of climate financing. And the speakers here talking about